Peace be upon you all, and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to have a discussion on a very important aspect of research, which is making your research proposal. Research proposal is a very important component of your journey as a researcher, especially if you are pursuing your master's or your bachelor's or PhD or postdoctorate. So I'm Muhammad Ubalikiru, and once again, welcome to my channel. So let's quickly look into the agenda of today. So in this presentation, we are going to talk about the following. Number one, we are going to define research proposal, then some tips and suggestions about research proposal. Then we are going to look at preparation for a research proposal. Then we are going to look at some sources of literature, then writing your first draft for your research proposal, then some of the structure or some of the components of your research proposal. And then of course we are going to look at some ideas towards the end of this presentation, and I hope you will like some of the things. So first and foremost, it's very important to understand what a research proposal is, especially for young researchers or even people who are already in the field of research. So basically, a research proposal, according to the following definition, is a concise and coherent summary of your proposed research. Also, it sets out the central issues or questions that you intend to address and how you intend to address them. And in short, what this is trying to say is that your research proposal gives your audience a concise or a summary of your entire plan or your entire idea, or what exactly you intend to achieve in your study or in your research. In another definition, it says a research proposal is a document proposing a research project, generally in the sciences or academia, and generally constitutes a request for sponsorship of that research. So this is another aspect of research proposal that is very important because not all research proposals are academic in nature. And the difference between the first definition and the second definition is that the first definition could fall under the academic environment, where a student has to present a proposal of his research intentions, so that the team or the people supervising him or the people actually trying to approve whether the research is worthy or not should be able to understand what exactly the student is about to do. While the second definition is more or less concerned about proposals in terms of business proposals, or maybe some research ideas which somebody intends to do with the intent to receive sponsorship or scholarship or something of similar nature. So whatever, depending on the situation and whichever you choose to do, they are all called research proposals. And sometimes the way we write research proposals for academia is different from the way we write research proposals for business purposes or for corporate organizations. Now, moving forward, here are some heads up that we really need to know before diving deep into this presentation. First is research proposal prepares you for your main research. This is one thing that we should bear at the back of your mind. So it gives you yourself as a researcher, it opens your eyes to understanding what exactly you intend to do, and it allows people to become aware of what exactly you hope to achieve in your journey as a student or as a person who is pursuing a career. Also, a research proposal can be used for both thesis or independent study, like I've just mentioned a while ago. And then a research proposal is not always academic. It can be corporate. That has already been mentioned. Then again, research proposal is not compulsory. And what I mean by this is that not every university accepts a research proposal in the beginning of the student's journey. For example, if we are dealing with a PhD, then not all schools accept research proposal. The student can just go ahead and start writing the thesis, and then the thesis will be corrected along the line. And sometimes it is solely something that is done by the supervisor or the team of supervisors, while in some cases it is very much compulsory for the student to produce a research proposal, and the student has to pass the proposal stage before moving further to the main research. And then lastly, research proposal can become your learning ground. Yes, of course, it can become your learning ground because research proposal helps you learn more about your journey as a student. You learn so many things. Sometimes you make mistakes. Sometimes you come to know things which you had no idea what they meant before at that time. So this is why research has become a learning ground for the student. Now let's look at preparations. So when somebody wants to pursue a PhD or a master's or whatever kind of research somebody intends to do, the first thing one should be able to do is to choose a domain. And by choosing a domain here is that you have to identify one certain area or two areas of study that you feel very much comfortable with. For example, somebody who is from computer science can say, okay, computer science is a very huge subject. There are so many things in computer science. We have artificial intelligence, we have system design, we have software engineering, we have database management, we have programming, and so on. So you have to choose which area of computer science you really want to pursue. Then, of course, you have to identify, now that you have chosen the area of research you want to do, then you have to target a specific area of research in order to narrow down the problem of your research, or to narrow down what exactly you intend to do. So now, as you can see, we have this example of a bicycle. Thanks to my former supervisor, Dr. Aman. He has always been a very wonderful person, and this is the kind of example he always gave us when we were under him. And this bicycle example, even though some of us make fun of it, but later on we realize it is one of the best examples when writing a research proposal. One should really understand this example. So this is how it goes. So this is a full bicycle, and this bicycle is representing your domain, let's say computer science domain. So now that you have a whole bicycle, you have this idea that you want to do your PhD, or you want to do your master's thesis on a bicycle, or maybe you want to do it on, let's say, forest, or maybe some animals. So now that we have chosen to work on bicycle, then what do we do next? Now we try to find what area of bicycle do we really want to target, because if the problem comes from bicycle, there are many components of bicycle that come with so many problems. There are many problems identified with bicycle. So what exactly are we targeting? So now, by targeting a specific issue, we realize that we are dealing with something that has to do with the pedals and the ring that rotates the chain up to the wheels and so on. So this is our specific area. We want to narrow it down to this area. But then if you look at this, it's also quite big for a research, for a PhD research or for a master's research. So now we have to say, okay, what specific area should we target on this particular aspect of this problem? So now we intend to do our research on the chain of the bicycle. So you see, what we're trying to do here is that we're trying to target a very huge domain which has so many problems, and we cannot solve all those problems, which means we have to narrow down our problem so that we can be able to handle the issues, or we can be able to solve the problem. So this is why we chose to break it down into pieces up to the time when we choose something that can really be a real problem and something that we can solve. So this is the idea of the bicycle, and this will help you in preparing for your research proposal by understanding the main domain, then the specific area, and then the narrowed area. Now, moving forward, these are some sources of literature that you have to look into before you start pursuing your proposal writing and so on. So basically in research, there are two sources of literature, the primary sources of literature and the secondary sources of literature. So normally primary sources of literature, they include those materials or those resources that we can actually read or we can actually learn from, such as interviews, such as talking to people, such as information collected through questionnaires, or maybe some diaries or some memo and so on. While in the other hand, we have the secondary sources of literature, which includes books, which include articles, journals, textbooks, and then of course encyclopedia and so on. So the difference between the two is that primary sources of literature, they are first-hand information that we collect in the process of the research. Meanwhile, secondary sources of literature, they include those articles that have already been written by other scholars or other researchers in the field. So this is the difference between the two. Now, there are some the databases that we should look into when conducting our literature review search. Google Scholar is one of them. Elsevier is also a very good source of literature for computer science students. IEEE is also good. Scopus is very, very good, and Web of Science, ProQuest, and so on. So these are some sources or some places where we can find literature, especially secondary sources of literature. For more details or for more information about outsourcing literature, I did a video recently, and the title of the video is Outsourcing Data for Research. In this video, we talked about different sources of literature and where to find these sources of literature, including data for training, including data for studying problems, and so on. Now, moving to the next issue. Now, let's talk about writing your first draft. So, first of all, we should know that writing your first draft involves a lot of reading, which means you have to dedicate your time to read a lot of literature, to read a lot of reports, to read a lot of journal articles, books, and so on. And in this process, one has to be very, very patient, and one has to be very, very careful, because you are trying to build a route for your research. You are trying to build a pillar that supports your research from beginning to the end. Then, of course, we have to do a lot of literature review, and there are a lot of ways we can do literature review. There are systematic reviews, there are citation analysis, there are some kind of what we call meta-analysis. There are many ways we can review literature, and each method has its own pros and cons. So depending on what exactly you intend to do, you should review your literature, especially using the systematic review. Systematic review today is one of the best ways of reviewing literature for research, especially PhD and master's research. And then, of course, you have to do a lot of note taking, because the more you read, the more you have new findings. So you can try this little trick in which you create a table which contains information related to authors, the title of the study, some of the contributions of the study, maybe limitations of the study, methods used in the study. So this kind of table should be able to help you track all the things that you did in the past, and to help you study or try to create a correlation between certain types of works of literature and so on. And then, of course, while you are taking your notes, you have to do a lot of points writing, meaning that you have to take down some important points so that when it comes to the time to write your first chapter, you should be able to have some important points at the back of your mind. And then of course you have to take care of your citations and your referencing, because citation is very important. Otherwise you can end up plagiarizing the ideas intentionally or unintentionally. So it is very important to take care of your citations, and of course you should choose a very good citation manager. We have a lot of them out there. The two famous ones are Mendeley and EndNote. Each one of these can help you with the citation as well as the referencing. And of course you can be able to choose or switch between different citation styles and so on. And then it is very important when writing your first draft to have some writing skills. You can read a lot of books. There are books out there on writing skills. There are videos on YouTube which you can read, and they have a lot of knowledge that you should be able to learn. And then lastly, write as you read. The more you read, the more you write. So try as much as possible to write so that you don't end up wasting your time reading alone, because sometimes when you read so much you tend to forget. So it's better to target the two things. You read and write at the same time. Now let's dive into the main event, which is the research proposal structure. So the first thing in your research proposal should be your first chapter, which is the introduction. In this case, some universities, they don't differentiate between chapters. Rather, they just write using headings. For example, they can just say introduction, literature review, methodology, and so on. But in some cases, which is almost the most common one, is that you have to divide your chapters into independent chapters. Okay, so whatever you write, it has to come under its chapter, as we are going to see in the subsequent slides. So in your introduction, the first thing you should be able to capture in your introduction is the background knowledge. Whatever you're studying, whatever the problem is, try to give a very comprehensive background knowledge about the problem, because that is the beginning, and that is what opens the eye of the person reading your thesis or your research. And then of course there are two most important things after the background knowledge. That is, number one, the statement of the problem. Statement of the problem is where you have to state exactly the problem you identified in your study, and then you have to mention what you intend to achieve in terms of objectives, how you are going to tackle those problems. So you have to state your objectives. So they are going hand in hand. And one important thing that I want audience to understand is the fact that problems should synchronize with objectives. Sometimes you realize that the problems are not linked together, they are not correlating, which means in the end you might end up getting a rejection because your problem does not match your objectives, or your objectives don't actually match the problems. So in your introduction, try as much as possible to highlight what exactly you're trying to do in this study, and why you intend to do this study, and who is affected by this study. These are three important questions that your introduction should be able to answer. And then lastly, you should try as much as possible to highlight the significance of your research. The significance of your research also shows the contributions you're going to give, and this is where it shows whether there is some level of novelty in your research or not, because the research is all about bringing something new or contributing to knowledge. So if your research does not have any contributions, it does not have any significance, then it will be very, very difficult for you to scale through. And then lastly, try to identify the scope and limitation of your research. The scope will help the reader understand what your research is going to cover and what your research is not going to cover. So this is for your introduction. So if you like, your introduction can come under chapter 1, or it can come just as introduction. And then, of course, sometimes there are questions of introduction or chapter 1 should contain how many pages. So sometimes it should be between 15 to 20 pages. This is generally the most acceptable way of presenting your first chapter. It shouldn't carry so much information that will make it difficult for your team or your supervisors to read. And then, of course, you have to take into consideration the fact that some schools, especially schools of humanities, students of history, English, students of drama, sometimes they have their introduction or their first chapter up to 30 to 40 pages. I've seen that in some students. Now, moving forward, this is your literature review. This usually comes immediately after your introduction, and normally it comes under your chapter 2. So in your literature review, the following should be clear in your literature review. Number one, the literature, you should have a literature on your main topic. Your main topic is bicycle. So at least try as much as possible to talk about bicycle, to talk about the wheel, and then of course the pedals, because you are going to work on this. So we need to have an updated knowledge about what exactly is the current state of the art in this topic. So try as much as possible to capture studies that have been done at least from the last 5 years. That depends on your supervisor. If your supervisor wants something more than that, then you have to look for something much bigger. And then, of course, sometimes there are some important studies that were done in the 80s or in the 90s, which are not recent, but relevant to your study. So you have to look into those kind of studies. And then, of course, you have to give a literature review of your method, the methodology you intend to apply in your study. This will give your reader, or this will give your supervisor, an understanding of how exactly you come up with this method and how the method is going to solve the problem. And it's going to show whether this method has been used by other researchers or not. If it has been used, then what are the pros and cons of this method, and what people have to say about this method. So try as much as possible to explain and justify the use of that method. And then if your research involves the use of theoretical framework or some kind of theoretical approach, maybe you have to apply some theories. For example, students of communication, students of English literature, sometimes they have to apply some theories. Students of management as well, you have to apply some theories in your study. So whatever theory you chose for your study and you intend to apply, then definitely you have to give a literature of that theory. And then of course you have to give a justification on why you chose that theory. And then of course try to highlight the gaps and holes you identified in the existing literature. This will help you during your proposal presentation, because the judges are always concerned about the gaps. The gaps are very important because they are the ones indicating that yes, there's a problem to be studied, because sometimes without a gap the student will just be dangling from one place to another. And then of course you have to mention how you intend to address the why questions and the how questions, why you intend to do this and how you intend to do this. So your literature should at least be able to explain this. As for the pages, sometimes a literature review can be up to 40 pages, sometimes 50 pages, sometimes 60 pages. And then of course it can come in many sections. It can come in let's say two of 1, 2 of 2, 2 of 3, 2 of 4, 2 of 5. Each one of these sections or headings has some other subheadings which explain one or two or more ideas about your literature review. And then, of course, I must mention this, when conducting a literature review writing, you should bear at the back of your mind that you have to be very, very critical of what you write, because literature review is not all about reporting what people have done about a particular field of study. It is also about criticizing what people have done. You have to chip in to assess and see whether this works of literature are really good, and whether they are having some pros and cons, whether they are having some limitations that your readers need to understand. So you have to be very, very critical of your literature review. Now, moving to the next is the methodology. Now, the methodology chapter normally comes as your chapter 3. In some universities, especially in my university here, sometimes methodology chapter can come under chapter 1, towards the end of your chapter 1. But still, the student has the option to use to bring the chapter 3 under methodology. So in your methodology, there are very important things that you have to observe. Number one is you have to give a view of your research design. You have to tell us in summary or using diagrams that this is how you intend to pursue this research. And of course, it has to start with a very good introduction to introduce the entire research design. And then, of course, you have to identify the step-by-steps procedures you wish to undertake during this study. And then, of course, you have to talk about your data, how you intend to, what kind of data you intend to use. Is it an interview data? Is it a questionnaire data? Is it a data from some kind of traffic which you collected on a network? Or is it a data related to people? Or maybe data collected from body measurement of some teenage children? So depending on what data you're collecting, you have to give a very full detail of what type of data it is and what are the complexities in the data and so on. And then, of course, you have to provide a justification for collection procedures, how you intend to collect the data, because there are many complex issues surrounding data collection, especially if it involves human beings, if it involves animals. So there are a lot of things you have to justify in this process. And then, how do you intend to select the samples in your in your collection process? When you collect the data, how do you intend to select the data? Which part of the data should be used and which part of the data should not be used, and who should be covered in the selection process? This is a very important thing, because if you over select, sometimes you become you do what we call bias. You end up being biased in your data collection or data procedure and so on. And then, of course, you have to provide a section in your methodology that talks about human subject review. How, if your research includes humans or animals, then of course you have to give some kind of review about the subjects. And then, of course, one of the most important aspects of research is the ethics statement, or sometimes we call it ethical approval. Sometimes you have to apply for this approval. There are some institutions or agencies with the government or some universities. For example, in my university, we have a unit that handles issue of ethical approval. So for those of you who are hearing about this word for the first time, ethical approval is actually a kind of approval which you have to seek before conducting research on human beings or animals, anything that has life and that can be endangered during this study. So you have to make it very clear that this is the method you are going to use in the collection of information from these subjects, and you have to make it clear that it does not involve affecting the health, or it does not involve affecting or putting somebody into risk. You have to make all this clear. Without ethical approval, you should know that some people cannot get a PhD because of that. Some papers were rejected because of ethical issues. So you have to be very, very careful on this. And then lastly, try as much as possible to justify all some of the things you mentioned, why you are choosing a an instrument, why you are choosing this methodology, why you are choosing this data, why you are choosing this subject, why you are choosing this collection process, and so on. Try to give some good justifications in order to create, or in order to, bring your ideas a reality. Now, moving forward is the next chapter. Sometimes preliminary data can come under chapter 4, but sometimes people just add it to chapter 3 of their research. So what is a preliminary data? Preliminary data normally is this kind of data that you receive during the process of this study, in the early stage of this study. These are some preliminary results which you have already acquired as a result of running 1 or 2 tests and so on, because some students, they prefer to run some tests to test and see whether their methodology will work or not, or to test and see whether their hypothesis can be proven or cannot be proven. So this is your preliminary data. So in trying to bring out your preliminary data, sometimes you have to give evidence of importance that this study is very, very important based on preliminary data. So you have to prove that. And then, of course, you have to give some findings of this preliminary studies. And then, of course, you have to give important categories and relationships. This might include the variables you use in this study, and you have to mention, or you have to identify or highlight the role of each variable and how each variable is going to affect the other variable. And one most important thing I like to mention under this section is the fact that people who are able to come up with preliminary data during proposal review or during proposal presentation, they tend to score, or they tend to pass their proposal, because for you to be able to get a preliminary data, it means you are really doing good, and it means you know what you are doing. So it is very, very convincing sometimes to give this preliminary result in order to support yourself in terms of passing your proposal review. So moving forward, now the conclusion here is not going to be under chapter 6 or chapter 5 of your proposal. Rather, it is going to be an independent heading representing the conclusion itself. So in your conclusion, unlike the final conclusion, which normally comes at the end of your thesis or at the end of your dissertation, in this case, your contributions should be clearly stated in your conclusion. What exactly you intend to contribute in this study. This is very, very important, because it's kind of reiterate, or it kind of show exactly that yes, this person is really trying to contribute something, and the contributions are very, very important because they have been mentioned many, many times, and they are very clear. And then, of course, you have to prove the importance of your study. You have to prove that yes, this study is really worthy of conducting, and it has so many contributions, it has so many significance in the area of the study, and of course it affects life and people and so on. So you just have to give this justification. So that is for your conclusion. So you have to make it as brief as possible. Now, the references and referencing. Of course, you have to mention each and every sources of literature that you consulted during the making of your research proposal. So when dealing with your references and referencing, you have to bear at the back of your mind that there is what we call the referencing formats. So basically, they can also be known as referencing styles. So we have so many of them. There are many of them, and different schools have different referencing styles that they want their students to use. Mostly people prefer to use APA, some MLA, some IEEE, depending on what your school actually wants. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, that referencing manager is very, very important. And 2 examples are given again, Mendeley and EndNote. So if you don't know Mendeley, just Google it. It's a very powerful tool, and I have done some videos on how to use Mendeley. So I also did another video on how you can write using Mendeley. And EndNote is also another powerful tool for referencing. You can try which you find most suitable and easy to use. That is your choice. Then, of course, one thing I want to say is that you have to maintain accuracy throughout, because I have seen many cases where a thesis or a proposal review is rejected because of some errors in the referencing. So referencing is very important, because it is the only evidence that we have that indicates that your claims are really valid. Okay, your claims can only be valid if we can be able to confirm what you have mentioned in your references. So references are very, very important. So let's round up this presentation quickly. So here are some points that I like to reiterate. Number one, when you complete everything, when you completed your proposal, try as much as possible to proofread it from beginning to end. Sometimes if you cannot, then you have to give it to a professional who can do it better. And then, of course, you have to do some formatting. Formatting means here that there are some things or some kind of settings you have to include in your thesis or in your proposal. So this formatting varies. Sometimes different schools have their different formats and formatting systems. So in my university, basically there is a website which we have to go, and we have to download a Word document template which has all the formatting, and it guides the student on what to do and what not to do. And then, of course, if it is compulsory in your school that you have to run a plagiarism check, then you have to do that. And for those of you who don't know this, plagiarism check is when you run your document, or when you run your entire study that you have done in a system, in order to check if there are some elements of works taken without acknowledgement. So this is plagiarism check. And sometimes some people believe that plagiarism check at the beginning of your study is very, very dangerous. And some believe that it's dangerous because there are some plagiarism software that tend to save the information taken from the document. So in future, when you run plagiarism again, it shows so many similarity index, indicating that this study has been plagiarized by you, or sometimes by something else. So sometimes you have to know the configuration of your plagiarism software before you run plagiarism. Otherwise, it's going to cause you some trouble in future. And then some people will ask this question: how many pages should a proposal contain? Now, this is a very delicate question, because it differs. Some universities, they have this limit of let's say 80 pages, some 30 pages, some probably 100 pages. So it depends. There is no any kind of right or wrong way of doing it here, but it depends on your supervisor, it depends on your school, it depends on so many factors. So my suggestion is try to talk to your supervisor and find out how many pages your school wants the students to have. So credit to these people for giving us some ideas. Some of the things taken from this presentation were actually from one of their models. So thanks to them. So this is the end of today's presentation, and thank you so much for listening. And if you have any question related to proposal writing, then you can post it in the comment section. And please don't forget to follow our channel for more amazing contents. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day. Bye.